So before 2020, it, everything was like normal, like there was hardly that many disasters. And people were like going to work and going on holiday, stuff like that. And there were no lockdowns, no restrictions, and there were and there were less significant wars. However, after years later, after 2024, in 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, and there was this major war and a lot of displacement, lots of casualties on both sides. In 2023, in the Middle East, in the before October, there were minor conflicts happening around in Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank, Palestine. I mean, there were no major wars. I mean, there were no problems like mass displacements, building large number of buildings were destroyed like that. I mean, there were a few buildings in Gaza that were destroyed. But apart from that, the situation was going slowly to the temperature. It was until 2023, on October 7th, when Hamas launched an unprovoked attack on Israel, as a result killing over 1,200 Israelis, including not just military but civilians, involving men, women, and children. And Hamas took some hostages, and people in Israel, a few were from other countries, including the hostages. However, the situation didn't start on October 7th. People from Israel, people from Palestine, there were conflicts throughout the years since 1948. Years later, in 1967, the West Bank and Gaza, they were occupied and all that. And there were the first and second Intifada. And in 2005, there was an election, and Hamas took over, and as a result, there was a blockade, which means people from Gaza couldn't travel by plane, they can't travel by sea. There were restrictions, and there were limits to how far they can go by sea. Anyway, since Hamas started this horrific attack, Israel in response did a counterattack, And in doing so, they didn't just go against the war in Hamas, but as a result, they launched an invasion in Israel. Many buildings were destroyed, civilians were displaced, and of and thousands of women and children were killed in Gaza. And it's been a year, and this and and now after a year, the level of destruction in Gaza is unprecedented. It's like there's hardly even a city left. All buildings destroyed, almost all buildings destroyed, all universities damaged or destroyed, hospitals destroyed, and all that. And although Hamas has weakened, there's some remaining hostages in Gaza. And since before October 2023, throughout the years, Hamas didn't just get funds like from Iran, after it came from Israel. And the Prime Minister Netanyahu, he he allowed $1.8 billion from Qatar to go to Hamas, and there were reports that he allowed it and encouraged it. So it's not just Iran, Lebanon, and Qatar. Some of it lies on to Israel and the Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister of Israel was against Hamas, why would he allow $1.8 billion from Qatar to go to Hamas? Anyway, the situation in Gaza is horrific, tragedy. As a result, people in Gaza who have been imprisoned have suffered a lot. And in Gaza, when Hamas took the hostages, they were subject to degradation, torture, sexual violence, rape. However, after Israel launched that counterattack and invaded Gaza, a lot of the people from Palestine suffered a lot, and such as torture, sexual violence, rape, and women and children. There was there was there was there was problems going on, like they faced violence, rape, and all that, torture, and throughout the time, when Hamas attacked Israel and started this war, since Israel invaded Gaza, as a result, women and children, over 60% of them died, and that was of the reasons. The reasons were like Hamas was hiding behind civilians and using them as human shields. But despite that, even though Hamas was using them as human shields, Israel just dropped over thousands of bombs on civilian areas, and the level of destruction and the amount of people that died, tens of thousands. And there were rumors that what happened, what Hamas did on October the 7th, and what Israel did. There were rumors and reports that there were allegations of genocide. And the genocide is the intent of killing civilians in an area, in a nation, and killing substantial numbers of them systematically and deliberately, and intending to destroy a nation or a group, and preventing births, preventing adequate healthcare, destroying things, and starving the civilians. Israel announced that it does not intentionally kill civilians. Despite that, tens of thousands of people involving women and children died, and a lot of the population is in food insecurity, and a lot of them, Gazans, people in Gaza, were starving. But it was Hamas. But let's remember something. It was Hamas who started this war. They not only killed over 1,000 people and took hostages. The people in Gaza, many of them who had voted for them, they were dancing, they were celebrating the massacres and supported Hamas, even though there were a lot of them who were innocent, who didn't agree what Hamas did, and who spoke against Hamas and all that. And despite, since it's a year, the remaining hostages remain, and there's throughout this year, throughout late this year, there hasn't been a ceasefire or a hostage deal, and the remaining hostages from Israel haven't been released. All violence from Hamas, Israel, and what Hezbollah did, it should all be condemned, but it was Hamas who started the escalation of this war, and this situation didn't start on October the 7th, it started way years after. And throughout, it's not just what's happening in Israel and Gaza. Problems happened in Syria, Libya, and in Syria, many more people, civilians involved, not just women and children, men, many more people, civilians, died in Syria under Bashar al-Assad's regime. And And that's what happened. Hundreds of thousands of people died during the Syrian war. And throughout the war in the Middle East, in Israel and Gaza, people like Israeli politicians, including one US Senator, Lindsey Graham, called for a nuclear bomb to be dropped on Gaza, which in Nagasaki and in Hiroshima, in Japan, when nuclear bombs were dropped. I don't want to say it. 1/3 of the population lost. And since those politicians have that, it's almost as if they're calling for a genocide in Gaza, even though people involving the Prime Minister announced that it does not intentionally kill civilians and does not intend to commit genocide. When Hamas attacked Israel, it was attempted genocide. They attempted to commit genocide. And Israel had the right to respond to that, otherwise Hamas would have killed many thousands more and destroyed the state of Israel. So, and media organizations and people around the world, including Al Jazeera, labeled what happened in Gaza genocide, even though people denied that what Israel's doing is not a genocide. If people who are pro-Palestine claimed what happened in Gaza is a genocide, then there are things that happened. The Americans invaded Iraq. Hundreds of thousands of people died involving civilians. How come Al Jazeera and other media organizations have not labeled that a genocide? And what about the war in Syria and in Ukraine? In Syria, hundreds of thousands have died. How come that's not labeled a genocide? And in Russia, in Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, lots of people died. So tens of thousands of people died. And that's not being labeled a genocide by Al Jazeera. And that's what's happening right now. I'm not sure when will the major wars in the Middle East and Russia and Ukraine would end, but time will tell. And all that, and in Gaza, people are getting limited food, they don't have clean water, and a lot of them are dying, not just from war, but diseases, dehydration, and famine-related illnesses. It's very sad, but that's the way it is. The way things are at the moment. We'll have to see in the next year or two how things will happen, whether there are any changes, whether the war will decrease, and all that. Definitely wouldn't want something escalating like But you know the rest. That's what happened so far, and all sorts of violence around, and killings, and all that. They should all be condemned. Anyway, so that's what I wanted to say, and I hope things will work out and get better in a couple of years or so. That is all.